So today I'll be reading Nelson Mandela, Words and Paintings by Kadir Nelson, and published by Catherine Teagan Books. I think this book is very useful in a classroom, especially dealing with cultural, racial issues, because it shows the power of a smart, successful black man of Nelson Mandela. It shows the power of resistance and the things that people can do of all different creeds and colors if they come together and work together towards a common cause, which is the dissolution of apartheid, which people that are white, black, mixed, Indian came together to fight. I also think that's very useful because it uses a lot of African culture in it. It explains a good amount of it, and it doesn't feel forced. That's doing, because obviously it's just talking about Nelson Mandela, and this is a very it's just his culture. So I'll be doing reading a little bit of annotations of, again, Nelson Mandela, Words and Paintings by Kadir Nelson. I'm going to adjust the camera just a little bit here. Okay. Haile Shaza played barefoot on the grassy hills of Quinu. He fought boys with sticks and shot birds with slingshots. The smartest Madbia child of 13, he was the only one chosen for school. His new teacher would not call him by his Xhosa name. She called him Nelson instead. Now, Haile Shaza is Nelson Mandela's the name given to him in Zushu, and Haile Shaza actually means, in that language, pulling the branch of a tree, or another way of saying troublemaker. Madiba, this word is actually the name of the clan, his almost family name. So when they said he was the smartest of 13 Madbia children, it means he was the smartest child out of his clan, smartest of that generation. And Xhosa is one of the official languages of South Africa, and it's the official language of Zimbabwe. Nelson was 9 when his father joined the ancestors in the sky. To continue his schooling, Nelson was sent miles away to live with a powerful chief. "Brace yourself, my boy." His mother held her tears and said goodbye. The chief held counsel to warriors, medicine men, farmers, and laborers, the elder ones who told stories of old Africa. And this is one of the things they would talk about. For centuries, Thembu, Pando, Xhosa, and Zulu peoples lived in the mountains and valleys of South Africa. The land was bountiful, fertile, and rich. The people hunted, fished, and raised crops, living in relative peace. But they made war on European settlers who came in search of land and treasure. The settlers' weapons were stronger and breathed fire. Slowly, the people were conquered. Their lands were taken and spirits dimmed. South Africa belonged to Europe. The elders grew quiet, and Nelson felt sorry. Now, at the beginning of the story, Thembu, Pando, Xhosa, and Zulu are all names of African nations that would go on to become different ethnic groups. Nelson grew into a young man. He attended fine schools in the Golden City of Johannesburg, which is the biggest city in South Africa. In Johannesburg, Africans were poor and powerless. Nelson became a lawyer to defend those who could not defend themselves. The government grew harsh and created a cruel policy. It split people into 3 categories: African, Indian, and European. It was called apartheid. The people were set apart. There were European-only beaches, European-only parks, European-only theaters, and the people protested. Apartheid is an example of racism that is supported by the law and supported by things the government does. So this was not the people deciding. This was the country and the government deciding, this is how we're going to separate our people, and these people, the Europeans, should have things that are theirs because they are better. That was a belief not only culturally, but also law. It was law, not only culture. Nelson organized rallies to fight apartheid. He said, "We must win back Africa." South Africa is for all South Africans. Amandala, he shouted. Niwathu, they responded. Power to the people, and the people loved him. Now, I am doing my best to pronounce these words. They're difficult, but Amandala means power, and Ninwathu means to us. So when it's said in unison or as a call and response, it means power to us or power to the people. This was a common phrase and a common rallying cry of people who were fighting against apartheid and fighting against this racism. But speaking out was against the law, and Nelson was arrested and jailed. He was arrested and jailed for a fortnight, which means for 2 weeks or 14 days, with 100 other men. They danced and sang, calling the ancestors to join the fight for freedom. Amandala Ninwathu. The ancestors sent their daughter Winnie to stand next to Nelson. They found love and married and welcomed children into the world. Together they stood and fought apartheid. What this book doesn't mention is that apartheid was Nelson Mandela's second wife of 3, but Winnie is mentioned in this book because she was instrumental in fighting apartheid along with Mr. Mandela. The state vowed to put Nelson in jail, and he went underground. He wore different disguises and lived in shadow. Empty flats, farmhouses, and bedrooms of friends became Nelson's home, while he organized more rallies and protests. The police put out a warrant for his arrest, but they could not find him anywhere. As you see, he grew out some of his facial hair, he changed his hair, and he would don different kinds of disguises. Nelson slipped across the border to visit free nations, where black Liberians, Ethiopians, and Moroccans freely conversed with white Europeans and brown Egyptians. They shook hands. A glimpse of freedom for life at home. Nelson returned to South Africa to cleanse his homeland of hate and discrimination. With a vision of peace and harmony, Nelson felt renewed and ready to fight for freedom. But on a drive to town, he was captured, arrested, and taken to jail, and people cried, "Free Mandela! Free Mandela!" Wet paint and posters covered South African walls. On a small island off the coast of the southern tip of Africa, Nelson sat in a tiny cell. Every day, the world passed him by. Cold meals, thin blankets, hard labor. Nelson hammered rocks into dust and read, studied, and educated fellow prisoners. Days turned into weeks, months, and years. When he was in jail, his children grew up, relatives passed away. South Africa began to fall apart. There were more protests, more rallies, and violence. The people needed a leader. Nelson snuck a message to the people: "I will return." As years passed, the world pressed South Africa to change. The new president agreed, and European-only signs came down. Beaches, parks, and theaters opened. Nelson's comrades were set free, and apartheid was no more. Apartheid was no longer in the year 1991. And just for reference, the United States completed the Civil Rights Act, which did the same thing as apartheid did. They made all areas open to all kinds of people in 1968, which is a 23-year difference. Nelson was an old man. After 27.5 years, the prison gates opened, and Nelson was at last set free. Thousands surrounded him, and Winnie hugged him. Nelson looked into the sky and smiled at the ancestors. "Amandala, thank you." The sun sparkled on his gray and white hair. Nelson stood proudly, with the wind at his back, and spoke to a colorful sea of people. We must forget our terrible past and build a better future for South Africa. Let us continue to fight for justice and walk the last mile to freedom. Millions were given the vote. Before now, only white people had been able to vote in South Africa. So after apartheid was over, millions more people were able to vote for elections, and they elected Nelson Mandela as their new leader. South Africa was free at last and finally at peace. The ancestors, the people, the world celebrated. Amandala Ninwathu. Power to the people. And at the back here is a short biography of Nelson Mandela, including an actual picture of him, and a bibliography of the sources used in this book. Again, that was Nelson Mandela by Kadir Nelson. Words and paintings all done by Kadir Nelson. And I feel like this was this can be a very useful book when talking about racial issues and racial inequality and overcoming that. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found it useful and interesting. All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.